All right, thank you, Jeremy, for the introduction. This is Courtney Witherell, and we are so excited to be able to share our knowledge and the process that we have gone through with implementing the Aware Premium tools in Eduphoria.
Let me click back on it.
Again, that's just neat. We don't need to repeat our introductions, but here we are again. And that's who we are and how we serve Comal ISD. So about a year and a half ago, our district went through the refreshing of our 5-year strategic plan process that was called the Collaborative Vision, was the name of the larger group and all of the stakeholders that participated in that. So I'll give you just about 15 seconds or maybe a little more just to read our refreshed mission and vision statement for Comal ISD. So what sets us apart? We are situated about halfway between Austin and San Antonio along the I-35 corridor. However, not all of our campuses are on that I-35 corridor. We have 589 square miles in our school district. So as far west as 281 and even a little further than that. And then we have some campuses east towards Seguin, and then we cover north and south as well. So currently we have 35 schools, 20 elementary, 8 middle, 5 high schools, and comprehensive high schools, and then we have 2 schools of choice. We are opening elementary number 21 in the 25-26 school year, and then a middle school will follow after that in a year or two. And then there's our SAT and graduation rate. We are approaching 30,000 students and growing. We're considered a fast growth district in the state. We have had a long-term partnership with Eduphoria. When I first came to Comal ISD 16 years ago, it was a brand new product in the district. So we are also in our 17th year with this long-term partnership with Eduphoria. And thank you, Jeremy, again, thank you for that introduction, and then also co-presenting with us at the assessment conference. So we appreciate that partnership.
I'll have to interject for just a second. She's being very generous. When she says co-present, I showed up, waved my arms, said hi, helped pass out candy. They did all of the actual work.
All right, well, my name is Patricia Nieto, and we just want to talk about our journey with STAAR 2.0 and how we use some of the Aware Premium tools in order to help diagnose where we were and what changes we needed to create and make. So we first talked about just STAAR 2.0 and what those transitions look like with new cut scores, with new item types. What did that look like, and how were we going to incorporate that into our analysis? Our analysis, of course, is our rear view mirror, but it does provide us with some warning as to the health of our instruction in Comal ISD. Then Jenny will talk about our method, and of course, we'll have a Q&A. So in Comal ISD, it is an endurance race when we are talking about assessment. We do have a very balanced assessment philosophy in model in Comal ISD. We have our diagnostic universal screeners, our BOY, MOY, and EOY. Coupled with that, some campuses do choose to partake or participate in the interim assessments from TEA, but we also have a very robust unit assessment product that our curriculum coordinators create based on data in the district. That is for all of our STAAR tested subjects, and it is an expectation that campuses and teachers use this to backwards design their instruction and use this as their sorry, I'm distracted. They use this as their unit test, their assessment test for students. It is like an endurance race. We do strive for consistency, reliability. We do use this to provide that just-in-time data for campuses to be able to prioritize student needs and make those instructional decisions in their classroom. And even with teacher changes that happen beginning of year, nowadays, middle of year, sometimes towards the end of the year, we do still rely on our unit assessments to give us an indication as to the health of our instruction in the classroom. It is a team effort, and coupled again with our universal screeners, our walkthrough data, we get a full picture of what that might look like for our students. So just like cars are the rolling diaries of our lives, they tell every dent has a story. Every time you get in the car, there is a new memory. And so just like Courtney said, our relationship with Eduphoria for the last 17 years has provided us a great deal of historical data that we can pull on to really hone in and determine what decisions we need to make as a campus and as a district for the needs of our students. We even import our MAP data in there. We import our PSAT and SAT data. So it really does have a very robust history for Comal ISD. So when we talked about what we needed to do for STAAR 2.0, we again looked in the rearview mirror and we used the cut scores from the STAAR test because we didn't have any data to determine what that might look like. Especially with the new item types, we did not feel like we could go back and use our previous year's cut scores because it was a different test. But we have been able to make these new assessments to mirror that STAAR 2.0. So we wanted to make sure that our cut scores were consistent with the STAAR test to see how predictive our unit assessments could be for the end of the year, especially as we were incorporating all of the new item types that Eduphoria was rolling out and how we were incorporating those to mirror the expectations that students would have towards the end of the year. So when we did the 180, can we make it or do we need to break our lap time? What does it need to be? How do we adjust our instruction? And so we did a multi-point inspection analysis to determine whether or not our stars were predictive. So we looked at our end of year data. Do we adjust or do we tune? So we did that multi-point inspection. How do we look at our EOY data at the end of the year? Was the interim assessment the most predictive? Were our UAs the most predictive? Was our universal screener the most predictive? And how did those things come out in relation to the STAAR test? And so as you can see from this image, we were a little bit all over the place. We really did try to match the rigor of the STAAR test. We analyzed our assessments. Like we said, we have a lot of historical data for standards. But we were a little bit all over the place. So we needed to make sure that we had a plan moving forward as to what this might look like. Our unit assessments are not blind. Our teachers are able to use them to backwards design. And so from that, we can predict that they probably would not mirror exactly the STAAR test because they are utilizing them for their backwards design to make sure that their standards are aligned and their instruction is aligned. Those concepts are freshly taught. We would expect that the kids would perform better. So we did use those 2023 cut scores, but we also thought we may need to adjust those. So with the focus always, of course, on that front windshield, not the rearview mirror, we knew we couldn't go backwards. What were we going to do to make sure that when we set new cut scores for the 24-25 school year, how were we going to use that in a using analysis to make sure that they were as close to predictive of the STAAR as we could get?
That's how our UAs have been, is we are evolving over time, and we have realized, hey, we've got to do something different because like Patty said, we weren't able to use our UAs to really predict what was going on with STAAR, and we wanted it to better predict that. So I attended a webinar with Eduphoria, much like this, a year ago, and I got exposed to some of the new tools that they have with multi-test analysis and single test analysis. And I started diving into that and going, oh, wow, I think that this might be the solution to our problem of our misalignment of our UA data to our STAAR data. So I'm going to kind of dig into the multi-test analysis. This is something that I looked into last summer. One of our big district goals and big things that we want to bring up is our 8th grade STAAR scores. So I usually start with 8th grade always. So this is going to be 8th grade. I pulled all of those UAs and in our multi-test analysis as compared to STAAR. And a little bit, I'm going to show you when you start into multi-test analysis, kind of some of the stuff that you're pulling in and like kind of the settings that you can configure with that. But just know that once you've set that up and you've pulled it in, this is what you would be looking at in multi-test analysis. The very top line with the bar graph is the 2024 STAAR data for math, for 8th grade math. And you can see you've got on the left your does not meets, and then your approaches, meets, and masters. And then underneath it is all of our 8th grade unit assessments and how they compared with the number of kids that got each of those 4 levels for scoring. You can see right away that we have a misalignment in the fact that just looking at masters alone, the dark blue on the right, our STAAR had a lot fewer kids that got masters versus our UAs. And that was really kind of, we knew that with the data and the misalignment that our UAs were inflated and they looked better than what the kids actually did on STAAR. And, but we were looking at this and I was going, wow, this is, I can really see it here and I can see how it really comes out. The big power in this is when you can actually get to go, actually, I'm going to show you first. So that was our 8th grade. You can see the master's score. We actually had 184 kids get masters just on UA2 alone. We had 435 kids that got masters. So huge misalignment. But then what we can do is go to correlation view, and that's where we have our big power of really looking at this. So in correlation view, it pulls up this view. If you notice, the top line's no longer STAAR, that has gone away. It is only the UA data. That's because it's seeing how does each of these UAs correlate to STAAR. And to give some of you guys a little bit of a math background, if you don't know about correlation, correlation is comparing 2 values. And so let's say, so we're comparing a UA to a STAAR. Let's say a student performs 85 on the STAAR test and they perform 85 on their unit test. And then another student performs a 60 on the STAAR test and they perform a 60 on their unit test. Those are perfectly aligned. And if every single score came out to be the exact same on STAAR as it did UA, your correlation would come out to be 1. So that would be perfect. That's what you want, is a correlation that's exactly right on at 1. Obviously, we know that's unrealistic. We're not going to have a correlation of 1 exactly, but we do want it as close as possible with what the kids are scoring on the UA to the STAAR test. So when you look at that right-hand view, you can see the higher those numbers, the more correlated they are. So when you look, it looks like unit 3 at 0.68 is our highest correlated UA to the STAAR test. That's kind of my benchmark that I used as I look through this. And I picked like a couple more, like the 0.67, which is unit 6. You could also look at unit 9. Those are pretty high correlation. And then the ones that are the lower correlation, you definitely kind of want to throw out and not look at as much. Okay. And so with that, you can actually go to the next, there's a tab that I kind of cut off on this screenshot, and it says achievement level comparison. So when you go into achievement level comparison, it looks like this, and you can look at it at the top is the graph view versus the bottom is the table view. And this just gives you a view of, okay, how many kids were off or, you know, one way or another on our unit assessment versus the STAAR assessment. So let's start with like the gray, the middle. Okay. When we're looking at the gray middle and that top part of the graph, those are kids that on that specific UA, let's say they got approaches on that UA, they also scored approaches on the STAAR test. So it was dead on with how it predicted that kid would do. Whereas when you look at the kind of light red one, which the table below shows you that's the +1, those are the kids that were one off. Okay. It is red for a reason, because these are our sad misses. These are the kids that maybe we thought this kid was going to get meets on the unit, like we showed they got meets on the unit assessment, but really on STAAR, they went backwards and got approaches. That's a miss for us. We definitely don't want, you know, to predict that a kid's going to do better than what they actually perform on STAAR. Whereas on the other side, these are the happy surprises. These are the kids that we said, okay, maybe they're going to be at approaches, but really on STAAR, they got better than that and they got meets. Okay. And so that's the blue side. And as you can see, it goes on to +2, +3. So what does that mean? That means that you're off by 2. So maybe we thought the kid was going to get masters, but really they got approaches. And off by 3 would be, hey, we thought on that UA that the UA said they were going to get masters, but really they got does not meets at all. That's a +3. And that's really bad. And you can see we have some that are even in that category. And so this was a big problem for us. And we're going, okay, we definitely don't want that. And so you can see, remember I said the one I like to focus on the most was Unit 3, because that one was the highest correlation. So that one I felt like had the most weight to me. But you can see how those actual numbers look. We had 617 right in the middle that were dead on, but we had 490 that were those sad misses. We thought they were going to do better by one reporting category than what they actually did on STAAR. Okay, so this was just very informative and giving us a quantitative number of how far we are off on these. And you can see we're much further off on the side that we don't want, where we're thinking they're going to do better than they actually are. But then this is where I went, I wonder if I can use this to adjust our cut scores to be more predictive of STAAR.
Jennifer,
And so,
can I interrupt a moment?
Yeah.
We had a question come in before we leave the correlation view and the performance level view. Question
Yes.
is, what data is being used to run the correlation analysis? Just to answer the question in terms of what Jennifer is actually showing us, what she hadn't dived into was in the settings, and we could demo this at some point later. You could reach out to support. We could talk to you about how to actually make those selections. But when setting up a profile here, you get to choose one assessment to compare against. And in this case, they chose the 2024 8th grade STAAR. And so that's the numbers that are being used. They're comparing that 8th grade STAAR to all of those UAs one at a time. Oh, here she actually has.
Yeah, I have it.
So
Yeah, but keep going.
you can see she actually selected that STAAR as the comparative test. And so it's comparing that STAAR to each UA individually. And then that correlation view is just running a Pearson correlation between the two assessments. And before it runs that correlation, it actually strips out the students that did not take both assessments. So you have to actually have the kids take both assessments for them to be included in the correlation. Now, that doesn't mean every student had to be on every assessment. It just means if we're doing the number crunching on UA1, every student that gets crunched had to take STAAR and UA1. And then it does UA2 separately. Every student that took UA2 had to be also have taken the STAAR to be included in that crunch as well. And so it does each test individually to give you those numbers. I hope that answers your question. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, no problem. No problem at all. Thank you. I'm glad. Yeah, I skipped over how we got there, and then I wanted to come back to this. So this is actually where I set it up. So yeah, you had to do a few little things before this to select which test. So we selected all of our unit tests. You can see we had 9 unit tests for 8th grade last year. And then I also selected that STAAR test. You can only do one as a comparative. Of course, I want to compare all the unit tests to STAAR. So that was my comparative point that I toggled over. And then this is, you have a few other choices when you set this up. But the beauty of this is that it saves. And so you can go back. And so this is what let me kind of play around with, well, what if our cut scores, because like Patty said at the beginning, we used what the STAAR cut scores were the year before. So if you looked at the 2023 8th grade STAAR, the cut scores for math were 35% approaches, 54% meets, and 77% was masters. As you can see on here for the 2024 STAAR, it actually, the approaches went up to 38%. So we went ahead and put the real 2024 cut score, but the score that we used all year with our UAs was that prior 2023 STAAR score, cut score. So that's what I had put in as the original settings. But what you can do in here is you can actually change those cut scores. So that's the beauty of, it's hard to go back and change all of your UAs and what the actual, it'd be pretty impossible to go back and change all those cut scores and see what those results would have been. And, would that have moved kids from approaches to masters or, or down the other way? But this allows you to play around with that. And so that's where we got our next thing. So when you're cutting, you're deciding to move this. So we had it at 35%. The thing is that when you're moving it up and you go, okay, I want to move it up. Well, it's no longer, it's all points for STAAR tests now. And so you have to think, well, if we went up in points, how much does that go up in percent? And I didn't just want to play around and do 1% each time. So I had to think, well, okay, if our typical UA has, let's say, 18 questions, then if I had my approaches level at 35%, if I went up 1 question, 1 point higher on the UA would be at 39%, right? And then meets would move up to 56%. So I just used like an old easy grader to go, okay, if I have about this many questions on my UA, if I'm moving up 1 percentage, 1 more point on this test, what would I set that new cut score to? So my first round of moving up 1, I went to 39, 56, and 78. So you can see in this, that's what I filled in as my approaches, meets, and masters levels. Okay. And then you can see when I went and looked at the correlation, how it moved the graph and table. So again, I've kind of highlighted unit 3 and looked at hypothetically, if those had been our cut scores on that UA, this is where we would have been. Okay, so we now have 618 students that are hitting dead on, whereas before it was about the same, but maybe we have a less of our misses on the our misses went down. That +1 was at 498 before. Now it's at 457. So we're starting to cut down on that number. But it really was, we found kind of too close, which is moving it up that 1 level. So we went up 2 points. So if you went back to this, that means our approaches level goes to 44%. Meets goes up to 61%. And masters goes up to 83%. And when we filled that in for our data, you can start seeing the red on the right is getting smaller. And yes, the blue on the left is getting bigger, and we don't want that to be too far off, but we do want to balance. We do kind of want this somewhere in the middle of those. And you can see with that unit 3, we're getting a lot more zeros. We're in 667 zeros. That +1 went down from 400. It started at 460 something. So now we're down to 380. So we're getting there. Moving to 3 points per performance level. We went ahead and went to that level. And as you can see, we're kind of getting a little too much. It's kind of like a Goldilocks thing here. We kind of got maybe a little too much on the blue side. But we're getting, better on that red side. But we're in that middle zone. We said, yeah, that's not quite perfect. So I did a little bit of adjustments, and I think I ended up with 3 more points for approaches and meets, but only 2 more for masters per performance level. And that seemed to be like our Goldilocks level. And if you look at our unit 3, we have in the, dead on 0, 653 students where it predicted exactly where they were supposed to be, where they ended up on STAAR. For just having that one-off miss, it was 312 kids. But on the one-off, on the other end, the good one-offs, we were almost at a 300 as well there. So we kind of felt like that was a good middle point with our scores and setting them. All right, so moving forward with that. So I will say that's what we did at the beginning of the year. Before school started, we said, this is our new cut score. We use that to make that balanced approach, and we set that for us. And that's what we have been using on our UAs all year long. And so that's, we feel like we are getting closer with that prediction. The time will tell with the end of the year STAAR, how close we were with predicting it, but we left that alone, that score. We didn't go back to multi-test and do anything after the beginning of the year. We have left that alone. But I will say, this is about how we use premium fuel to help make adjustments to our UAs. So now I'm going to kind of dig into how I use single test, but this is for every time I look at a UA. Do we have any questions at this moment that we need to do before I move on with single test analysis, or are we doing good?
Actually, perfect. We did have one more come in, and I literally just said we may wait for the Q&A, but since you paused, this is a good chance.
Okay.
After you made those adjustments to the cut scores in multi-test, what did y'all notice about the correlation numbers? Did you see them change or shift in any way?
That is
Go ahead.
Yes, I can answer that. That is a good question. I was surprised at first to see that the correlation did not change at all, but then I had to go back to where that correlation number comes from. Remember, adjusting a cut score does not change the student's actual score. So if a student scores an 85 on the UA, and they score a 75 on the STAAR score, where I arbitrarily say that the cut score is at, and what makes a kid at, say, the meets versus masters level has no bearing on that 85 they scored on the UA versus the 75 on the STAAR score. So the correlation actually doesn't change, right? So the actual set score that they make will not change that correlation number. Does that make sense?
It does perfectly. And Jennifer, Math Wizard Deluxe, I need to come take your math class sometime soon.
Yes.
Thanks. But at first it threw me off as well. And I was going, why doesn't this change? It should be getting better. What we're really doing is getting better at predicting what level they're at, not the exact perfect score. We're going to obviously have some things are still going to be off on our UA. Like I'm not going to, maybe if we had a blind UA and maybe if it was more spiraled and a little bit longer of a test, would it really be closer to the actual score that the kid's going to get on the STAAR? And then that correlation would maybe change. But as far as these short, this is every 2 to 3 weeks, it's the fresh stuff on their mind. They're probably going to do better on these UAs than they do on the actual STAAR test, especially since ours aren't blind. And teachers, may, whether we want them to or not, teach towards the test, but we don't really want them to. It's going to make it a little bit better. But by adjusting those cut scores and going up on those cut scores, we can justify that to say, but now this will help to combat the fact that that score might be better, but it's now going to more reflect what they would maybe perform on that test. So just to go into that a little bit more. All right, we good to go into single test?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, cool. So when I'm looking at each UA, I go into single test analysis. So I pull up last year's UA. So at the time that I was making this presentation, I was actually making a 7th grade UA. So I was pulling out that information, just took screenshots as I was making my adjustments to my UA. And so when you first pull in your single test, I'm looking, like I said, last year, that's why it says 23-24. And this is what you'll see at first. And this is all the questions on the test. So we had 13 questions on this UA, and you can see which ones kids performed well on and which ones, you know, like number 3, they didn't do so well on. Know that the dark blue ones are partial credit, meaning they had, you know, 2 points to those questions. And so that's the first thing that you look. Now, the beauty of what I look at, and I will say single test analysis has some fantastic stuff in here that is great for admin and instructional coaches and teams, teacher teams to look at and to analyze their tests, not necessarily from the year before, although they could do that, but from the test they've just given. There's some fantastic tools. I'm not going into them. I'm just talking about how I use this for my test creation. So I'm going to skip a lot of these wonderful things that are in single test analysis. And I'm going to go to that tab that you see at the top that says test analytics. And this is what you get with test analytics. Okay, so on the left, you can see the item number. And, you know, so like we said, there was 13 questions on this test. And then we have difficulty. Okay, so item difficulty, like did we have 60% get the question right? That's the item difficulty. So you could see that in many different places in Eduphoria, but it's nice and, you know, put to just right here in one place. And I will say that I use that item difficulty first when I am looking at my UAs, and I want to make sure that I have a nice balanced test. And I'm going to show you a little bit more of this on the next slide, but just looking down that item difficulty, you can see there's a lot of 70s and 60%, which to me goes, that's maybe a little too much in the 60 and 70%. I want some questions that are a bit more difficult. I want my whole test to be balanced. I want it to be a nice bell curve. And so that's what we're going to look at. And I think I can go back. So let me go to this. I want that nice normal distribution of my data, where if you were to take that data we were just looking at with the item difficulty and actually graph it, which I am nerdy enough that I do graph it, you can see that I had 6 questions that were in the 60 range. I had 4 questions in the 70 range. Okay. And so my overall test is a little bit left skewed. I want it to be that normal distribution in the middle. So I want to make sure when I'm looking at my test, I want to take some of those that are in the 60s and 70s, and I want to get some harder questions in there. I need something to score in the 40s, maybe the 20s, you know, maybe another one in the 30s. I need some more, you know, even distribution of this test. So that's one thing I look at when I'm looking at my tests. The other thing I use single test analysis is this corrected item total correlation. So this total correlation is really looking at how our kids are doing on this test item based off of how they did on the whole test altogether. Okay, so let's say we're looking at a kid that has performed very well on this test, and they are scoring in the high 80s, maybe even the 90s. But there was a very easy difficulty question, but this kid that performed very well over on the test didn't get that question right. That's not what we would predict, right? If the kid was doing well overall in the test, but then on that individual question got it wrong, but it was a very high scoring question, that makes us go, there's something off on this. Is there something maybe in the way that I worded this question? Is there maybe a bias that this kid didn't get past on this question? So we really need to dig into that question and go, is there something going on? And it could be the opposite end too, right? A kid that performs low overall on the test, but now they're getting one that was very difficult. They're getting it right. That's also going to throw this correlation, the corrected item total correlation off. So we need to look at these that are scoring low. And I know all these numbers look low, but I will tell you, Eduphoria does do a good job of it, puts that little I next to it. And that's the ones that it's saying, hey, you may want to pay attention to this question because it's exceptionally low performing. And like I said, the correlation's only going to go so high. Like this is not one that's going to go to 1, but it is showing you that there's something off. And those that have that I next to it, I have found I need to look at, there may be something going on with this question and how it's worded. And I may need to swap it out with something because there's something students are not getting with that question. And so we pulled for a first couple of our units, how are we doing so far with our approaches, meets, and masters? And we are getting better. I won't know on the multi-test analysis, the correlation until we've had the, actual STAAR test occur, but you can see that, we are starting to get a little bit better on, our number of students that are getting approaches and meets and masters. Our masters alone, that number has gone down some. Which is, we knew we had way too many kids that were in that master's level with where our cut scores were before. So hopefully we're getting there a little bit more as we go into this a little bit more. So really, that's it that we had to share with you guys today. And we thank you very much. And I guess now we'll take any questions that you guys have over this whole thing.
Right now, we don't have any questions, so I'll take just a moment to say something and see if anyone would like to drop any questions into the chat or into the Q&A. Jennifer, I really appreciated the attention you put into the test analytics, where you really called out that the thresholds and the warnings that you see, those little icons, are really just an indication that, hey, this item is interesting. You might want to go look at that. It's not necessarily saying definitively this question is good or this question is bad, because there are a number of things in the local context of the test day and the what's going on with the kids and how did the instruction play into what was going on with with how the students were answering the questions. And so I like to offer and say, when you're looking at the test analytics, and by the way, if you have single test analysis and you don't see the test analytics tab, it's a setting that's activated by test type. So someone in the district with the appropriate rights to manage those things would have to activate it by test type. And allow that to be seen. But the analytics is really just a warning system and not a definitive, this one is bad and this one is good. So use that local context when trying to analyze any of those things, and keep in mind, a lot of factors play into it. Instruction is one of those big ones. Okay, let's do one more slide. I really want to thank our guest presenters, Comal ISD, for coming out and presenting this for us. Here at Eduphoria, we really value our partners. That's you guys, all of the districts, and how you guys utilize our platform. And so we really appreciate the context you were able to give to giving that premium fuel to what you guys do in y'all's districts. If you're with us still, give them the proverbial round of applause. I know we're all muted, but they certainly deserve it. And ladies, I just want to thank you again one more time for joining us, and we appreciate y'all's time.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, keep an eye out for the recording in y'all's emails, and we'll catch y'all next time. Thanks for joining us.